All right. Thank you. So I will talk about the economic context that this whole workshop is happening in, and in particular, the labor market that young workers will face as they try to make this transition from school to the workforce. And I will focus most of my comments on the labor market that's happening right now in the aftermath of the Great Recession. But I'll do some things that go back a little bit farther. So first, I will talk about, is this me? Okay. And I have one question. Can I walk over there, or am I stuck here? I should just stay here. Okay, all right, that's fine. I tend to move around, but I will try to hold steady. So this will just give you, this is not about young workers, this is just a labor market overall. So this is just the unemployment rate over time. You can see the first hump is the early 2000s recession. The second hump is the Great Recession. The black lines are actual unemployment rates, or the solid lines are actual unemployment rates, and the dotted lines are projections. So what we have right now is an unemployment rate of 7.5%. That sounds like a huge improvement since our peak unemployment rate at the end of 2009, which was 10%. But the problem is most of that improvement has not been happening for good reasons. It's been happening because people have either dropped out of or never entered the labor force because job opportunities are weak. And you can actually put some numbers on that. The Congressional Budget Office, they estimate the size of the potential labor force, which is how big the labor force would be if job opportunities were strong and we didn't have these people dropping out. 159 million. That's their estimate of the potential labor force. The actual size of the labor force is 155 million. So right now we have about 4 million missing workers, workers who would be in the labor force if job opportunities were strong but are not in right now. If all of those folks were counted as job seekers, were counted as officially unemployed, the unemployment rate would be 9.7%. So that's the kind of, we have a scene out there where job opportunities are more consistent with an unemployment rate near 10%, not an unemployment rate of 7.5%. And just so you know, I estimate that around 30% of those 4 million missing workers are under the age of 25. So around, just slightly over 1 million of those missing workers are young workers. And then finally, just to throw even more of a wet blanket over everything, this is not improving very fast. At the current rate of job growth, we will not get back to health in the labor market for at least another 5 years. And to just put a sort of a benchmark on this, that reference line is at 6.1%, which is the highest the unemployment rate ever got in the early 2000s recession. We are not expected to get back to that until the end of 2015. So we will be at extremely elevated unemployment for at least another 3 years, very unlikely to get back to health in the labor market in sort of the near term at all. So that's the scene that this cohort of young workers is trying to make this transition from school to work in. I want to make another point here. The bottom line shows the unemployment rate over time from 69 to the present, from 1969. And the top jagged line is the unemployment rate for those under the age of 25. So a couple of things I just want to point out about this plot that you'll see in a bunch of my figures. Those vertical shaded lines represent recessions. So you can sort of see how business cycles factor into this. The last thick one, obviously, is the Great Recession. The key thing to note here is that the unemployment rate of young workers is always about twice as high as the unemployment rate overall. In good times and in bad times, it's remarkably stable at around twice as high. That's true today. So what this means is that there's not something unique about the Great Recession that's attacking young workers in particular and ruining their job prospects. It's that the labor market overall is extraordinarily weak, and young workers always have a higher unemployment rate. And so that's what's causing the very, very high unemployment rate of young workers. All right, so I'll get specifically into the labor market prospects of a couple of groups. These are the 3 groups that I'm going to focus on. Some of this focus may seem weird, but there's sort of data quirks that made these groups the right ones or good ones to look at. In all cases, I'm looking at young people who are not enrolled in school to try to capture what's going on with those who are making that transition from school to the workforce. So the three groups are workers without a high school degree, age 19 to 24, high school graduates, young high school graduates just getting out, trying to make the transition to work, age 17 to 20, and young college graduates who do not have an advanced degree under the age of 25. So those are the groups. I will now show you unemployment rates for each of these groups by race and ethnicity. And I'm just going to start with those in the interest of time. And also, I think it's really important, and Debbie touched on this, any time you look at overall numbers, it masks huge disparities by race and ethnicity. So I'm just going to show you those. And I want to, before I show you those, just touch on the issue of what kind of safety net is there for workers who do not find a job, for young workers who do not find a job? And unfortunately, the safety net of federal and state assistance programs often does not cover young workers due to eligibility requirements such as significant prior work experience. Our safety net is not designed to deal with a ton of young workers entering a labor market that has persistent, profound weakness. So the most glaring example is unemployment insurance. That's meant to deal with a time like this, but you have no access to unemployment insurance unless you have significant work history. So many young workers who can't find jobs have to turn to their families for assistance. This trend is likely burdensome to parents, many of whom may also have been hit hard by the recession. All right, so the numbers. This will be for the less than high school, and I won't talk about, I'll quickly go through these, but these are unemployment rates for workers with less than a high school degree. You see a couple of things, big disparities by race and ethnicity, but all groups have substantially higher unemployment rates now than they did before the recession started. So if you look at blacks, for example, young black high school dropouts went from having an unemployment rate of about 33% before the recession hit, now it's over 50%. For whites, it went from 18.7% before the recession hit to 27.3%. And for Hispanics, it went from 10.4% to 20%. So a big increase across the board. This is young high school graduates. So those high schoolers just finishing and entering the labor market. Same story, huge disparities by race and ethnicity. Blacks went from having an unemployment rate of around 33% to 44.7%. For whites, it went from 14.5% to 26%. And for Hispanics, it went from 13.4% to 30%. So again, a giant increase across the board, sustained. I meant to actually say this on this last one. The black unemployment rate has not yet showing any signs of turning back down. So we're still seeing this. I don't expect that it's going to continue going through the roof, but this is certainly showing, as of now, no evidence that it's even stabilizing yet. Okay, and for college graduates, all right. The sample sizes can be low, so you get jumpiness. So just ignore that huge spike in the line for black college graduates, because I don't think there was actually something like that happened in the labor market. But the general trend is still there, that you see big increases in unemployment rate. For blacks, it went from 8.2%. Young black college grads, 8.2% before the recession started to 11.9% now. For whites, from 4.9% to 8%. The line for Hispanics was too jumpy to show, too small of a sample size, but the data suggests it would be sort of in between blacks and whites. One thing that I think is important to take home here is that these are lower unemployment rates than for workers with less education, but they still are extremely elevated now relative to where they were before the recession started. So even though young workers with higher levels of education are better off, they're still much worse off than their older brothers and sisters that graduated before the Great Recession hit. All right, underemployment of college grads. This is sort of in the myth-busting category. This shows the unemployment rate, not by race, just overall for young college grads, and the underemployment rate. The underemployment rate here I'm using is BLS's definition, that it includes the unemployed, The marginally attached, which are people who want a job, are available to work but have stopped actively seeking work, so they're not counted as unemployed, and people who are working part-time but want full-time jobs. Note what that underemployment rate leaves out. It does not include people who are working in a job that doesn't use their skills or experience. So it's excluding the college grad who's working as a barista. But I'll get to that in a second. But for now, if you just go with that, you can see that even by this definition, there's just an enormous swath of today's young college grads that are unemployed or underemployed, 18.3% compared to 9.9% before the recession hit. And to get at the underemployment of college grads in the sense of them being in jobs that don't require their college degree, I turned to the work of Andy Sum at Northeastern University, who has gone through occupations and figured out and determined whether they require a college degree or not, and then looked at the share of college graduates who are in work or who are in jobs that require a college degree. So one thing to note is that there is always a huge amount of underemployment of young college grads, always. Even in the year 2000, when the labor market was booming, we had an unemployment rate of 4%. Still, 40% of employed college grads were working in jobs that did not require their college degree. So it's always there, but it's substantially elevated right now. Right now, 52% of employed college grads, young college grads, in this group are working in jobs that don't require their college degree. So according to his analysis, more than half of employed college grads are not using their degree, but they're lucky enough to have jobs. We have, in a time like this, you have what economists call occupational downgrading. The people with a college degree can actually, they're sometimes viewed as better for jobs that don't require a high school degree. Employers will sometimes view them as better for jobs that don't require a high school degree than somebody with just a high school degree. So they can sort of shift down, take the job that doesn't require the high school degree, but then workers without a college degree are just knocked off the bottom. Okay, I'm running out of time. I will try to do this quick. Here's an important one. People say, oh, all these missing young workers, they are taking advantage of this opportunity to go back to school. There's a silver lining to all this. They'll actually be better off because they can go to school. And what the data show is that, yes, enrollment rates have increased since the Great Recession hit, but no more than would be expected given the long-run trend. These are the long-run trends in enrollment, and you see no uptick due to the Great Recession. Students have not been able to shelter in school. The key reason for that is students and workers are not two distinct groups. Many students actually have to be able to work to make it through school. And so if the labor market is pulled out from under them, they actually can't afford to be in school. So to the extent, I do believe that there's some students who've been able to shelter in school from the bad labor market effects of the Great Recession, but these data, the lack of an increase in enrollment, means they've been offset by students who have had to drop out or never enter because A, they couldn't find a job that could help them work their way through school, or their parents, because of their own income and wealth hits in the Great Recession, could no longer afford to help them pay for school. So this big drop in employment amongst young people due to the Great Recession and no recession-induced increase in enrollment means that there's been a huge increase in the share of young people who are not enrolled and not employed. So it's just a huge loss of opportunities for this young generation that will actually follow them for the rest of their lives. I'm going to skip some stuff on the costs of college because I want to get to wages. For those who are lucky enough to land jobs, wage growth is bleak. This shows, the first three show young college graduates, the young college graduate group by gender, and the bottom is the young high school graduate group by gender. You see big declines in the Great Recession. That's totally exactly what you would expect at a time like this, when employers see a queue around the block for each job opening. They don't have to pay big wage packages to get the workers that they need. So wage growth is very low. But if you'll note, in the weak business cycle from 2000 to 2007, wage growth was also very weak. So if you look over the entire decade from 2000 to decade plus, from 2000 to 2012, there's been big wage declines across the board. That stands in sharp contrast to the big wage increases in the tight labor markets of the late 90s. Look, over this whole period, where are there increases? In the late 90s, that's when the unemployment rate was low. Oh, I'm running out of time. The unemployment rate was very, very low. Labor markets were tight. Wages were actually growing for young people. This just underscores that the young workers' outcomes really depend on the state of the labor market when they enter. If they're lucky enough to enter when the labor market is strong, they do much better than if they have the misfortune, through no fault of their own, to enter at a time when the labor market is very weak. I will quickly, this shows the same thing, but for the less than high school, which wouldn't fit on the prior graph. This is a health conference, so I just want to not skip this. This is the one place where I touch on health. It talks about health insurance. So this is the share of workers who get health insurance from their own employer. So of those who are employed, are you getting health insurance coverage from your own employer? This is part of the overall erosion of job quality for young workers. You see a big decline since the start of the Great Recession, but there's actually been big declines over this entire period. One saving grace from this is that from the 2010 Affordable Care Act, people under the age of 26 can now stay on their parents' employer-provided health insurance. That has increased the share of young workers, young people who have health insurance coverage. It should be noted that if you're not lucky enough to have a parent who has a job that offers employer-provided health insurance, that option does not help you out. And I will just finally end this by saying, looping back to the point that the scarcity of job opportunities for today's young workers relative to 2007 is a symptom of the weak labor market overall. So the one and only thing that will quickly bring down the unemployment rate of young workers to make the transition from school to the workforce even possible is strong job growth overall. Policymakers may be focused on deficit reduction, but that focus is misguided and harmful, focusing on policies that will generate demand for U.S. goods and services, and thereby demand for the workers who provide them. Policies like fiscal relief to states, increase massive investments in infrastructure, direct job creation programs in communities hit hard by unemployment. That's what we should be doing to give young people a fighting chance as they enter the labor market during the aftermath of the Great Recession. And I'm done, and sorry I went over.
Well, Heidi, I think I speak for all of us when I say thank you for that incredibly depressing picture of American society. They don't call it the dismal science for nothing. So now to talk about something that I'm positive is going to do more than anything else to expose the generational divide between our young adults in the audience and everybody else. Amanda Linhart from the Pew Research Center is going to talk about the new media.